leadership coach here at TPE. We also have Giovanna, who is a coach here. She has been in the game also 20 years herself. And then we have our, I call it my Swiss Army knife. We have Neftali Franco, who serves as our bilingual coach. He has his slate of people that he coached primarily speak Spanish, so he does a great job with coaching those individuals. And the four of us, we make up what is known as the Pivot Experience, or commonly known as TPE. I want to plug in here. If you guys do not know, we have an app. So you can go to your app store. You can go to whether you're on Apple or on Android and download the TPE Leadership app. We have all of our events there. We have content there that you can enjoy. So if you have some time, go and download our app. If you participate in services with us, that's where you can do your bookings and get additional things from us. So we love the app. So we would love for you to download our app. If you guys have any questions or concerns or any feedback or anything that resonates with you, please utilize the chat function. We're going to be talking throughout this session, and Giovanna is going to remind us for us to use it. But if anything pops into your mind, we're going to have about 15 minutes or so toward the end of the session to facilitate those questions and get through those things that stuck out to you guys. And before we get started in our session, I really, I've said this already several times, and I want to say it publicly on air. I want to give kudos to Roderick. I know he's our guest today, but Roderick has been working hard. I've already said I've known Roderick for quite some time, so I've seen him as a teenager to where he is now, and the growth and development that he has. Let me go back. The work that he's put in has been incredible, and it's really culminated into this moment. I also want to give a huge shout out to Giovanna Roach, who is his coach. She really helped him dial in those and fine tune those communication skills. And we believe that if it wasn't for Giovanna here, maybe we might still be waiting around a little bit more. She has been more than a catalyst for Roderick's growth and development. And we want to just publicly say on air, we appreciate everything that you do here, everything that you brought to the table, and what you will continue to do. Now, we're going to get into our session. Before we do that, we have a little icebreaker that we like to do here at TPE that I honestly will say that I got from another podcast that I really like it. And so we're incorporating it here. And so, Roderick, I'm going to go rapid fire on some words. I'm going to give you 2 words per session, and you have to pick one of the words. You can't be in the middle of the road, can't be lukewarm, okay? You got to lean in on one of these words. And so the first set of words is empathy or accountability.
Empathy for sure. I'm a people person, so I definitely lean on giving people grace and things like that in my leadership style. So I would definitely say empathy.
Excellent. Innovation or consistency?
Innovation. I think we're talking about the business that we're in, Chick-fil-A. We're talking about long-term sustained growth. You want to make sure that you're setting yourself up for future success. So if you're, kind of just middle of the pack, comfortable with the monotony of, doing the same thing every day and not wanting to grow, it's not setting yourself up for long-term success. So definitely innovation.
I like that answer. All right. Recognition or development?
Now, when you would send me this question, I kind of was like, what do you mean by recognition or development? Can you kind of explain that to me a little bit?
Would you prefer to be recognized or developed?
I would say developed for sure. I think me being in part of TPE kind of just already shows that I'm more inclined to be developed than recognized for sure.
Good deal. Clear expectations or freedom?
Clear expectations. I think I would call myself the type of guy that, I like to be, told exactly, okay, this is what you kind of need to do. This is what's expected of you in your role. And I kind of am being able to execute that. But I understand, in this next season of my career, it's going to be kind of a lot of freedom. But I'm excited about the opportunity and stuff like that. So definitely clear expectations.
All right. And here's the last one before we get the session kicked off. Results or relationships?
Relationships for sure. Like I said, the first answer I gave, I'm definitely a people person. And I think people are what drive results. And if you don't have those relationships, those people, you won't have the result. So definitely relationships.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for participating. And now we are in the hands of Giovanna and Roderick.
All right. So first and foremost, I want this session to be really interactive, and it can't be interactive if only me and Roderick are talking. And so as we talk through certain things that you have questions about, please put your questions in the chat, because that's where at the end, I'll probably have Ashley or Neff facilitate the questions for us. Might have to be Neff because Ashley's sitting next to Roderick. But I really want this to be interactive, because I know Roderick has told me that he's been getting a lot of phone calls around, the process of LDP. And so here is your chance to ask him or I any questions that you want answered about the process. So don't be shy. Please put your questions in the comments. And I'm going to leave a good chunk of time, hopefully at the end. And I'll watch the time. And Alex, if you'll kind of help me watch the time so that we can have a good 15 minutes at least at the end where we can answer any questions that people throw in the chat. So I want this to be interactive. And so does Roderick. Roderick is to the point. So there will be 15 minutes probably left at the end for you guys to throw your questions out there so we can answer those. I will say this too. But when I joined TPE, so I actually was working for another coaching company before. And when I joined with Alex, kind of before we brought Neff and Ashley, I guess it started kind of with me. I guess he offered hey, do you want to be a part of TPE? And when I joined and then we brought on Ashley and Neff, I already had a couple clients that I had brought with me to TPE that I was previously coaching. And I actually told Alex, I was like, I want to coach Roderick. And I told Ashley, I was like, I don't know if Roderick wants me to be his coach, but I would love to coach him. And so I think maybe that's kind of how it started out was, hey, Giovanna wants to work with you. How do you feel about that? And he was like, I guess that's what I need to do. So Roderick, thank you for being, I would say, my guinea pig, because we have really worked together to figure out some ways to help with communication and answering questions and interviewing. And so you have been for sure awesome at letting me just try random things on you to see how it works. So I'm super appreciative of that. So I wanted to break up today's conversation into 3 parts. These are kind of the 3 questions that we get more than anything else in the LDP world, is questions about how to tell your story really well. The process of interviewing, what does that look like from the time you submit your application until you get to that final interview? So just questions about the process, and then interview preparation. So I wanted to break it into 3 sections. We're going to start with story, because I think this is the key to answering all the other questions really well in the interview process. And I'm going to tell you guys that working with Roderick helped me to see that the key to interviewing is just to know who you are and where you want to go really well. Like that's what the key is to any interviewing process. And so that's kind of where we started in the process was, hey, Roderick, tell me your story. And the funny part about Roderick, when I first started working with him, is his story was 1 minute and 30 seconds. I actually have that written down, that it was 1 minute and 30 seconds. He didn't tell me he was married. He didn't tell me he had a kid. And basically all that he told me was his Chick-fil-A story. And I see that a lot. People coming and saying, hey, I want to go into LDP. And then you say, okay, what's your story? And all they tell you is where they've been and what they've done with Chick-fil-A. And so the first thing I wanted to do today with the story conversation is I wanted Roderick to tell his story, because I want us to be able to kind of digest his story a little bit. And also too, just to get to know who Roderick is and why he wants to go into LDP. So we're going to start with Roderick telling us his story. So it's take the lead, Roderick.
Absolutely. First and foremost, if you guys didn't know, this is my wife, Ashley. We've been married for the past 5 years, made 5 years in July, but we've been together for the past almost 10 years. So I got the opportunity to marry my high school sweetheart, born and raised in Beaumont, Texas, where we still currently reside. Come from a very conservative Christian household. being that my parents have been pastors ever since I was a kid. So what they looked like for me was Sunday mornings, Sunday evenings, 2-3 times during the week for rehearsals, Bible study, worship rehearsal. That's just what my life was and what my life kind of still is to this day. Super grateful to be one of 6. So I come from a very large family. I'm the 4th child, but I am the 2nd boy. So 3 boys, 3 girls. So you can imagine the headaches that we gave my parents growing up. Also, we do have a lovely daughter. Her name is Zoe. She's almost 3, so she's beautifully tearing our lives upside down right now. But again, super grateful to have her in our life. But you can imagine, being one of 6, some of the financial hardship that could have came with. So as soon as I turned 16, I started working at HEB actually worked there for maybe about 6 months. And at the time, my high school best friend worked at Chick-fil-A, and he said it was very fun. So I went to a group interview, which we don't even do anymore. Group interview. Got the opportunity to work started Chick-fil-A. So that's when my Chick-fil-A career started when I was 16. Worked at Chick-fil-A throughout my high school career. My senior year, I went up to college, but so I got the opportunity to work for my operator, Robert Hinkle, over the holidays and breaks like that, stuff like that. But about a year and a half into my college career, my parents really kind of hit like a rough spot and in their finances. At the time, they were living in a hotel, so I just felt a pull and the urge to come back home and help them kind of get out of that situation. So 19 years old, working full time, and that's kind of really when my Chick-fil-A career really kind of set off. At that time, I was really invested and bought into the vision of Robert and his restaurant. And Robert gave me the opportunity to go to the home office, and that was like the Energizer bunny in my back. I think that's really what propelled my career forward. Getting the opportunity to meet Dan Cathy. I like to tell this story as well. Me and Robert and some of the team members were walking down, I think it was either the stairs or elevator at the home office, and Dan Cathy came around the corner and he was like, "What's up, Rob?" And I think that was like such a flooring moment for me, being that Chick-fil-A is such a large corporation, but the CEO of the company knew Robert by name. That was just something that held so near to my heart. And when I came back from that trip, I would say like an Energizer bunny again. That's when really my career propelled forward. I got the opportunity to serve as like a shift lead, your normal manager, work my way up into the training director role, served in that role for about a year. And then shortly after that, I moved into the role where I currently serve now as director of operations. Currently, I am as you guys know, I'm pursued the Chick-fil-A Leadership Development Program. Super excited to work with Giovanna and her help me get into this goal. And I just feel blessed to partner with such a company like this. I don't think I would ever want to go into business or do business or work for a company if it's not Chick-fil-A. And just the thought process and the ability to maybe one day be an operator and being able to create an environment that truly cares about people and that cares about also, not the people that's in front of the counter, but the people that's behind the counter. And just, again, super excited to be here. And just a little bit about me.
All right. So when we first started working through your story, what did you realize about yourself?
I realized my values, what was really near and dear to my heart and what I really valued. I think you said at the beginning when you first asked me what was my story, and I told you a couple of things. Everything was just about me being in Chick-fil-A, but that's not the only thing that I do. That's not who I am. It's just a thing I'm blessed to do. So if anything, I think me cultivating my story was really getting to know, really me confirming my values when it comes to my faith in God and the value of my family, some of the things that I hold near and dear to my heart.
So when we first started working together, I had Roderick tell me his story multiple times. And it was really interesting for me to listen to it kind of over and over again. And one thing that I really like to do when we do work through someone's story is to record it and to have them listen to it and to have me listen to it and try to pick out what are the things that they value and making sure that their story actually states those values some way, somehow. I think I have another client on the call right now, Joseph. And that's one thing with his story that we've kind of been working through is just making sure that we're hitting the values piece, because if you don't hit the values piece, they can't know who you are. And your story is specific to you. And that's another thing that I constantly see with clients. And I think, Roderick, you kind of did that in the beginning, was you tried to tell me the story that you thought somebody wanted to hear. Yeah. And you weren't really true to who you were. And so it was hard for me. And I think it was almost like there was a wall. There was a wall built up. When you talked about your parents living in a hotel.
Yeah.
The first conversation we had about that, because there's a big question, and I think this is a really good thing to throw out there, is Roderick doesn't have a college degree. And that was something that was really in the beginning was like, okay, Roderick, they're going to ask you that question. Why do you not have a college degree? Like, you went to college and you didn't finish. And that's going to continuously be brought up, right? Yeah. And in the beginning, he said, well, I just had a lot of really hard stuff going on and I didn't really, I just couldn't finish. And I was like, that's not good enough. I need you to be real with me of why you did not finish college. And so finally, at one point, he said, well, this is what was going on in my family. And I was like, okay, you need to say that. Like, say that was what was going on, because that's the true you. And man, that's admirable that you dropped everything that you had going on in your life to help your family out.
Yeah. And I also think, when I was trying to cultivate my story and kind of piece together my story, I was trying to tell somebody else's story. And meaning, I had conversations with people that's in the program and operators, and, their stories were really compelling, but me trying to mirror, what their story is. But, me kind of becoming at peace with, my story is my story. My story is unique to my journey, and nobody can tell it like I can. And the thing about it, your story is like, it is your story. So it is unique, regardless of, whoever story you kind of put it up against, it's unique because it's your story. So I think that's really important as well.
Yeah. So when we first started working together, what were some of the things that we did together that you felt like really helped you piece your story together?
I think the story map was probably one of the most helpful tools that we used. Just being able to break down my life, technically by seasons. What did my early childhood look like? What did middle school, elementary, high school, what did that look like? And what did kind of my college days look like? And even now into my adult life, being a husband and being a dad, what does that look like? And kind of where I wanted to go. That was super helpful. And even though I didn't mention all of that in the story that I just told, we kind of came up with a game plan. Okay, we have a 5-minute story. That was kind of the 5-minute story that I just gave. But hey, if somebody asked me, hey, give me your long full-time story, long 10, 15, 20-minute story, we're able to do that because we were able to break down our story by seasons, from early childhood to, middle school, high school, and even till, what we're doing now. So that story map was definitely super helpful in kind of cultivating the story that we put together.
So in the interview process, how often, like in each interview, so going through the 4 different interviews, which we'll get into the interview process here in a minute, but how often were you asked to tell your story?
So it was 5 interviews, and I was asked 3 times to tell me. They don't say, what is your story? Right. They give the famous, tell me a little bit about yourself. And that's kind of the trigger. What is your story? So three times I was asked, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay. So 3 out of the 5 interviews you had, you told your story. Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. If you guys have any questions about the story piece, put them in the chat right now so that when we come back to it at the end and we have the Q&A, we'll be able to answer some more questions about the story. Because I do have some things that I could give as tools. Now, it's more helpful to have somebody to help you work through those tools. I can talk to you about some tools, but it is very helpful to have somebody work through those tools with you. But if you have questions, go ahead and put it in the chat right now so we can circle back to that in the Q&A section.
And if I can jump in here, I think one of the most valuable pieces that I'm kind of gaining from this, and I just being, I heard you say it, Roderick, I know I heard you say it, Giovanna, too, just being comfortable with your actual story. A lot of times people might feel, ashamed or embarrassed to say certain things about themselves, but you guys both said it. That is your story that contributes to who you are. It crafted your thoughts, it crafted your decisions. And so don't be afraid to express those things. And I only bring that up to say that if you're going through these tools on your own apprehensions are going to show up, and then you're going to muzzle the things that are probably the most important and most valuable to you. And so working with someone else that's going to tell you, hey, that's great, it's going to give you the confidence to be able to say, well, maybe I should include this in my story because it's actually uniquely a part of me. And so not trying to plug us or anything like that. This is with anybody. You can be talking to a friend, you can be talking to somebody who you think is a colleague, but if you do exercise these tools, really incorporating somebody else as to be able to hear that and to give you that confidence to say what you need to say.
Yeah, and I'm happy that you said that, Alex, because I don't know if you remember this, Giovanna. You sent me a podcast before my final interview, and I think it was entitled "Putting It All on the Table." And I think, just like you said, Alex, I think a lot of times we're apprehensive to share like the raw, real moments in our life that's kind of helped shape us into who we are, into the people that we are. But the interview process is only 4 or 5 interviews, 45 minutes to an hour, and you kind of have to give them try to give them so much information to make you competitive and compel them. And if you're consistently holding those things back, that do make you unique and competitive, that's just, I think you're doing more hurt than helping yourself in the interview process as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to think, I tend to think that stories like that illustrate grit. It illustrates your ability to persevere through challenging situations. So don't be afraid of those things. Obviously, if you've gotten to the interview point, then you have made it past whatever those things are that occurred in your life. And so don't wear it as a mask of shame, but wear it as a badge of honor, as to say, hey, this is something that we went through. This is how we dealt with it, and we're on the other side of it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good. I'm saying this coming from a Christian perspective, but it's almost like your testimony. So when people say, hey, what's your testimony? And you're like, man, my testimony's boring. Like there's nothing that, or I don't have much to say. Everybody has something to say. There's a story to tell. You just have to figure out how to tell yours in a compelling manner. That's all it is everybody's got a story to tell. Everybody has gone through things that have shaped them. It's, can you actually say something compelling in your story to be able to convince somebody on the other side of the screen? Because that's what it is. There's a screen between the two of you. These interviews aren't in person. Can you convince somebody across the screen that, man, I want to give this person a chance because their story is compelling and they have the knowledge to be able to take that next step with Chick-fil-A. So I want to move to actually, we're going to go through the process, the section 2, Roderick, the questions I sent you for section 2. Yeah. So I want you to walk me through the interview process to get into LDP, all the way from the time you submitted your application. Yeah. And you can even start with like the time that we worked together before, like what was that entire time? What did it look like?
So before I really pursued LDP, we were already working together, kind of just working on my leadership skills, soft skills, kind of making me a better leader, being able to lead in the restaurant, in the role. But when I kind of put it on the calendar, hey, I want to pursue LDP, that's kind of when we kind of really focus all of our energy into, interview prep and things like that. But after putting my application in, I actually got told no. And it's because well, I was laughing at me because she always say I rush things, but I actually answered a question incorrectly, and I followed up with Nick Persico. He works at the home office, and he was like, "Well, you answered no to this question. The question was, do you either have 5 years of leadership or a college degree?" And I do have 5 years of leadership. So after that, I was able to kind of continue into the interview process.
And hold on, but until you keep going. So when that happened, he sends me a message and he's like, I got I think it's an auto-generated no. And I was like, okay. And I think you sat on it for 4 weeks. And
so
correct. And I said, you need to find somebody to ask why you got told no automatically.
Yeah. So I had a Robert that just came back from Next, and he had put me in contact with a guy named, I forgot his name, Tony Revelise. And then he put me in contact with Nick Persico. He's in the interview. He does the interviews for the program and kind of helped me start the interview process. So the first interview is the restaurant acumen portion of the interview process, and that really kind of I would like to call it like the foundation for the interview process. You know, really kind of getting to know who you are as not only as a leader but as a person, and then also really about talking about the roles that you served in the restaurant, and also the results you've been able to generate in the restaurant. And then additionally, really kind of leaning in and talking about, like I like to call it back office things, reporting. Are you familiar with, FCR, food costs, labor reports, things of that nature, and kind of really kind of testing your competency in those different areas. And then moving on into the second interview was the restaurant. The restaurant acumen. So really,
so the first one you said restaurant, but the first one's
business. I'm sorry, the business acumen. The second one was the restaurant acumen. So I like to call it like a big QIV. So really kind of testing your competencies on like the product. Do you know the product? Do you know what a Chick-fil-A sandwich looks like? Do you know what a medium fry is supposed to look like? And that's basically what it is. The interviewer, he placed a mobile order 15 minutes before our interview. And walking into that interview, we walked through each product that he placed, and it was all self-led. So I had to pull out a Chick-fil-A sandwich, a grilled sandwich, a medium fry, and basically lay it all on the table, from the, when we receive it off the truck to, how it's prepared into getting to the guests. That was the bulk of the second interview. And then moving on to the third interview was the comprehensive portion of the interview process. And I was really kind of leaning into like my behaviors as a leader, more like a lot of scenarios. Have you tell me about the time you fired somebody? Tell me about the time that you've had a disagreement with somebody that's above you in leadership. Tell me about the time you maybe had a disagreement with your operator. Things of that nature. Career kind of testing and seeing what type of leader that I am. And then moving on to the final round of the interview process was basically just like a big combination of the first three interviews. I was having a conversation with somebody just this past week, then there's nothing necessarily that you need to prepare to bring into the fourth interview. You just need to make sure that your answers have been consistent and that you're sharp and you're ready for the fourth interview. Because the questions that were presented to me in the fourth round, they were pretty much all asked in the first, second, and third round, maybe just in different wording, but yeah.
And that interview was more rapid fire.
Yes. So in the fourth, my fourth round of interviews was two different interviews. The first interview was with two people from corporate staff, and then the last one was with one person from corporate staff. And the first one was probably one of my worst interviews, I would like to say, because it was like Giovanna said, rapid fire, just very fast questions. Because you're only in the room for 45 minutes, and they kind of make sure try to get as much information as they can. So one person would ask a question, I would have a moment to kind of think and answer correctly with like a good context, and then the next person would ask a question. So that was probably one of the more tougher interviews for me, but got through it. And you're going to be nervous through all four of their interviews. It's just kind of the process, and they want to make sure that the people that they're picking are the right seat and the right people for the job.
So from the time you started, exclude that like 4 weeks where you got told no, which I'm going to be honest about that. I told you I was really worried about that because you answered a question incorrectly and then they put you back in the pool. So I was like, you have a lot to prove, because basically you got to know, and you messed up on a question on the application and now they put you in the interview pool. So what was the time frame after that 4 weeks where they put you back in the pool? What was the time frame on all the, like, from beginning to end?
So my first interview was May 17th, and then my last interview was at the beginning of October. I want to say October 9th was my last interview. So around maybe 5 or 6 months is kind of the process. In between each interview was about a month. Time in between each interview.
And I think one of them got rescheduled because she was in Canada.
Yeah, and one interview got rescheduled because I was doing an FTS assignment in Canada at a grand opening. So about a month in between each one of them.
Okay. Which interview do you feel like you did the best and why?
The third interview was probably my best interview, just because at the beginning I was really kind of able to connect personally with Nick Presico. He was a guy that was interviewing me at the time, and I was able to connect with him because we were both married around 5 years, and we both have a daughter that's 2. So that was kind of like a really kind of hitting point for us. So we were able to connect really early and kind of have a really good conversation. And as soon as I was able to connect with him, everything, all my nerves kind of like subsided. And I was kind of just able to articulate and communicate clearly through that whole interview. So I would definitely say interview 3 was one of my sharpest interviews for sure. But as far as on the other side of it, my most challenging interview was definitely that last round. The first round of the last round, with those 2 corporate staff. Like I said, they were just really, really challenging me in very fast pace and kind of catch me off guard at times for sure.
So when we first started working together, what were you most afraid of? Like when it came to the interview process, like what was your biggest fear and how did you work through it?
Communicating in general. That's always been an opportunity in my leadership. Just being able to, talk clearly and concisely and kind of get my thoughts processed out clearly. That was one of the biggest things that scared me going into the interview process. I wouldn't say I'm the best speaker, but you're not good at anything if you don't actually work towards it. So getting the opportunity to work with you challenging me every single week that we would meet on, questions and telling me, hey, maybe you should word this differently, or you should look at this at a different angle and things like that. And just intentionally, being able to translate that into, the day-to-day operations at the restaurant, was paramount. And me kind of like hurdling, that area of weakness in my leadership. And if you ask me 6 months ago, would I be in this call like this, really kind of communicating my story and telling, how getting to the program, I would say you're lying. But it's just a testament of you really kind of, if you work towards something, you put in the work, there's the grass is greener on the other side for sure.
So one of my favorite exercises that I had you do, and I still have people do this, by the way, I've had a couple of leaders do it, is I told Roderick, just because he was so afraid to communicate, like it was almost like I would ask a question and you're like, I don't want to give her the wrong answer. And so it was just like fear set in instead of just telling me what you think. And so when we first started working together, I told him that I wanted him to walk the block 3 times a week for 15 minutes and tell his story out loud into the air. And he was like, people are going to think I'm weird. He's like, people in my neighborhood are going to think I'm weird. And I said, yeah, they're going to think you're really weird when you own your own Chick-fil-A. And he's like, okay, you're right. And so I remember having you do that. And then you came back a couple weeks later and your story was so much better. And I was like, did you do the exercise? You're like, yeah, I did it. And it actually does work. And it's funny. I've actually done that exercise for myself. Just working through my own story when, I want to be able to tell my story when somebody asks me. Sometimes I'll walk the neighborhood and I say my story out loud, and it kind of helps you change the way you communicate so that people actually would want to listen to your story.
Yeah.
So that was one of my favorite exercises I had you do. And you were like so fearful that you were going to look dumb walking your neighborhood. Like this guy's walking around talking to himself. Who does that?
Yeah.
But I love that. Okay. If you have any questions about the process, go ahead and put those questions in the chat. Because I don't want you to forget that you wanted to ask any question about any one of those interviews. So the process is application, business acumen first, restaurant acumen, combination, and comprehensive. Yes, comprehensive. And then the last interview, which that last interview, from the communication that you got, Roderick, it could have been 2 or 3 45-minute segments.
Yeah. So I was kind of talking to a couple other people that were working through the process at the same time, and some people had 3 interviews for the final round, 45-minute piece, but I was only two interviews, 45 minutes apiece. And I guess I answered this question because I saw it coming across, and all the interviews are virtual.
Yes, it's all done virtual now.
All done virtually.
Yeah. All right. Last little section before we go into Q&A. Interview preparation. What were some of the things that you did to prepare yourself for the interview process? Like, was there things you did like right before the interview? Was there were there certain like books you read, podcasts you listened to? Like, what did you do to get yourself in the space for the interview process?
Yeah, for sure. As far as like working towards the interview process, working through questions, of course, working with you, I would, there's a lot of question banks going around. So kind of going through those question banks, making sure I'm kind of familiar and able to like articulate, give good answers around those questions. That was kind of one of the ways that I kind of prepared myself. And actually, I'm gonna say I was kind of in college, in school, every night before I go to sleep, I was, in the office or in bed, looking at things as concerning LDP, kind of making sure I was kind of always sharp. But as far as like before the interviews happen, I kind of make sure I either went to the gym or went for a run around the neighborhood, kind of get those nerves and jitters out the way before the interview process. But that was kind of one of the more key things that kind of helped me before the interviews, for sure.
Well, and one thing Roderick didn't tell y'all in his story, and I think in his longer story he has this, but he has lost how many pounds?
So about 120 pounds. Yeah. 120.
Yeah. So getting into physical shape has been one of your, I think, it's one of the ways that you help with stress.
Yeah, I mean, it helps with a lot. I mean, as far as like, stress, just being more available for the people that are around me. Being more available for my wife, being more available for my daughter, being more available for the people that I work with. That was one of the key things. And just, like I said, just being more healthy is just, I think that's just a key, a good habit to have in life in general, just being more fit and stuff like that and healthy. So,
yeah. So, and I'll throw a little plug in here. This is some coaching things that I do with some of my clients, but the energy pyramid, I think, is key just to get yourself ready for an LDP process. But that energy pyramid around physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental health, like you got to have all those things clicking, especially as you're about to enter a phase of your life where you're going to be working 70, 80 hours a week. Some weeks might even be 100, yeah. But making sure that you're ready for that, because that itself is going to be a lot going into LDP. And not all assignments are like that. You're not going to be in every assignment you have isn't going to require that you work 100 hours a week, but there are going to be those moments where you need to be ready for that. And I think that's something that you have been preparing yourself for, thinking about going into the LDP process. All right. A question that we get a lot just for interview preparation is, how often did you do mock interviews, and with who? And like, maybe even give some information around the success of that, because I sometimes hear and deal with clients who are like, I'm going to get 10 mock interviews set up, and I'm like, okay, but is that really what you need in this season, depending on where you're at in the process? So like, what's your feedback on who, when, how, what when it
So
comes to mock interviews?
So I only did 2 mock interviews. I did one with Abram Moon, which he was on one of the lead betters. I did one with him, and I did one with another person, Caleb Park, that was in the program, and that was kind of it. As far as me prepping for the interview, you working one-on-one with you kind of running through those questions, giving me feedback was kind of like the interview prep. I needed to kind of get into the getting into the thought process of how to answer questions concisely and clearly. But I've heard feedback from other people that got into the program that doing mock interviews was paramount in the success of them getting to the program. So I think it comes down to really kind of preference. But working with a coach can definitely may negate the need to do mock interviews, but it's all up to you for sure.
Yeah, and I think I've heard both sides of the story of like, okay, I need to get out there, and it's good to hear from different perspectives from different people. But one thing that I always caution people on is too much feedback in that area can be really detrimental to your performance when it comes to the interview process, because too much feedback at times, like you almost get confused on like, okay, who should I listen to? Like I have this person telling me to do this better, and I have this person telling me to do this better, and I have this person telling me to do this better. And so if you what I would say, if you're an overanalyzer or feedback, you have like get paralysis when it comes to like gaining too much feedback. I would err on the side of 1, getting a coach and then really listening to their feedback, but then 2, really thinking through who you ask to do mock interviews for you, whether it's an operator or somebody who's an LDP.
Yeah, because I don't want to cut off, John, because the program is consistently changing. Having a conversation that with somebody that was in the program just 3 years ago, it looks a lot different. So just like you said, Javonna, being kind of not picky and choosy, but being particular about who you do mock interviews with is important for sure.
Yeah. All right. What advice would you give to someone who is considering going into LDP? Like, what would be the 1, 2, 3 nuggets of advice?
I really just have one. I would just say get uncomfortable. Like I said, mentioned before, communication was one of the biggest things that scared me going into the interview process. And the reason why it scared me is because I never worked at it. And now looking on the other side of it, me being a better communicator, is because I was able to get uncomfortable talking to myself in a camera, walking down the street, talking to myself, having my wife answer questions and having her listen to me talk. Those are all moments of me getting out of my comfort zone to work something that's so much bigger than me. So my one key word of advice was just really get uncomfortable, because we all know that LDP is such a great and huge opportunity, and it's going to take a lot of work to get you past that hurdle. But if you're comfortable, you're kind of content in where you are, that won't lead to your success.
So I love that you said that. My phrase is become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it's almost a double negative. Like, what? Become comfortable with being uncomfortable? I honestly think that's a good word of wisdom when it comes to just leadership in general. Like anytime we sit in our comfort zone too long, to me, that's where I see like stagnant leadership growth. And so like just learning to be comfortable in the uncomfortable as a leader, I think is really important because it's going to push you to the next level. I feel like I've always kind of been comfortable with being uncomfortable. I feel like that's my, like, hey, that was an uncomfortable thing to do, but man, it stretched me and it grew me and it pushed me to be a better leader. It pushed me to be a better mother. Like in any aspect of your life, it doesn't matter. It pushed me to be a better wife, to learn to just do things that are uncomfortable and maybe you don't feel like you're good at. Because I feel like that's going to lead to where you see the real growth happen in your life. Yeah. So yeah, I love that. I love that piece of advice. Now, last question before we jump into, go ahead and any more questions you have, put them in the comments right now. But this question's for Ashley. And I asked her if she would do this for me. what advice do you have for the spouse of somebody preparing for LDP, and as now you're preparing to be an LDP wife, somebody that's going to be traveling around? I know that y'all are still trying to figure all that out, but like, what advice do you have for the spouse and or girlfriend or fiance, or of somebody who's preparing, but also somebody who like the preparation process, but also somebody who's going into LDP, and what that's going to look like?
Well, I guess my first set of advice, I guess, just to show grace. I think, like Roderick mentioned, like there's be time he's up late studying or practicing questions, or oftentimes you hear him talking. I'm like, who is he talking to? He's talking to himself. And not, I mean, you get used to that part. He's not going crazy. But I think just showing grace. I think just like I think any marriage or any great relationship is like you have to support them chasing their goals. And sometimes marriage, it always isn't going to be 50-50, right? Sometimes you might have to, take up more of the housework or more things around the house while he's studying, and vice versa. And honestly, it's like a season of, you going through college. Like you are studying these questions to get to a point, like you have 45 minutes to tell your best story, right? And I know in the questions they ask, like, different roles and stuff you serve, you have to like try to fit that within your answer. Like answer questions they're not asking within your answer. And so a lot of that, the more times you answer questions in your head or out loud, you're able to change up words, make it more concise, things like that. But I think showing grace, I think also too, I worked at Chick-fil-A since my senior year. So I do have, I guess, I understand that Chick-fil-A can become all-consuming and like the ins and outs of Chick-fil-A, all of that. So I think just, being able to help him answer questions are like, hey, I think you should change that. That also, I guess, helped with that. But I think the main thing is just to show grace. Don't be afraid to correct them. Like if they need to change a word, you know what I mean? Like you want them to be successful themselves. And I think also too is just like research. Like there's tons of Facebook groups out there. Don't feel free to like ask somebody else who's a spouse in LDP. How is it like? What have you wish you done before you left? Things like that.
She's already plugged into like 2 or 3 LDP spouse groups already.
I think even Chick-fil-A in general, like there's a ton of Chick-fil-A Facebook groups. Alex misses me because I'm in all of them. But it's true. It's like, why don't reinvent the wheel if there's a wheel out there? Like take it and like edit it and keep it going, save your time, things like that. But no, I think Chick-fil-A, I mean, we all are on this line because of Chick-fil-A. It's a great company to work for. So with that.
All right. So Neff, since I don't want Ashley fielding the questions next to Roderick, you are a question fielder. And me and Roderick will just try to both answer them the best we can.
For sure.
All right, Roderick. So Pierre had a question, said, wouldn't the interviewer be looking for competencies in your story? How should my story be tailored to the role, if at all? So how did you convey those maybe competencies that they're looking for as you went through the interview process?
I would say just get familiar, with the competencies. I think me and Giovanna, I think there are 7 competencies, and I can't name them all 7 off the top of my head. But just kind of making sure you're familiar with those and making sure that you're leading through those. As far as, your role, I would just say get really familiar with, your role and the results that you've generated in that role, and show how you've been able to lead people in that role would be my answer to that question. I hope I answered you well, Pierre.
Yeah, there is a list of competencies that you need to really kind of be, I would say, and when I worked with Roderick through these competencies, I would say, okay, where are you at on the scale and what things do you need to do in order to get better in that area? That's something that I can do as a coach, is like go through those with you, and you can help figure out where those can be put in your story. But my suggestion on the story question is, and Roderick talked a little bit about it, but there's a short version to your story and there's a longer version. Typically, I say keep your story between 8 and 12 minutes, 12 minutes being your longer version and like 6 minutes being your shorter version. But at least half of your story does not need to be Chick-fil-A related. They do want to know that you're a person outside of Chick-fil-A. I know being in Chick-fil-A for almost 25 years now, like it is at times all consuming. But like this is still at the end of the day, it's a job, and we are human beings outside of Chick-fil-A. We have wives and husbands and kids and like some of us have other jobs, and some of us do things at church, and some of us are involved in other, different organizations. And so like being able to communicate that is also very important, because they do want to know who you are outside of what you do at Chick-fil-A. And so I always try to say, make sure that at least half of your story is non-Chick-fil-A related. I actually like to err on the side of like maybe even like 60% is non-Chick-fil-A, and then the other 40% like going into that part of your story. I made Roderick, I think with his story, like the first 4 minutes I wanted it to be non-Chick-fil-A. So that was like when he told his story today, y'all notice he didn't get to Chick-fil-A, and he told the shorter version today. But he didn't even get to Chick-fil-A until I think like three and a half minutes in. So just sticking to make sure that that's like your whole story is not Chick-fil-A.
And I guess just to add to that too, I don't know if some of you guys were on the Lee Bear that we had with Eric Cinco, and he just kind of talked about making sure you avoid talking about the things that you don't want to talk about, and to not to take credit for things that you did not have a direct hand in spearheading. I think you can kind of, especially working in the restaurant, you could have the sense of, well, I was a part of that. I was there when this happened. But did you truly, work behind the scenes to develop the plan and to develop the strategy to see to get to the result that you are trying to get to? So just making sure that your story is your story, and the things that lead into your competencies are the things that you directly had a hand in doing and not someone else. And then, I'll use a direct example from Eric. He was like, if you don't want to talk about that time in New York, don't even bring up New York. Stay away from the East Coast altogether if you don't want to talk about it, so just to add that in there.
Yeah, that's awesome, Alex. Thanks.
All right, next question. So Roderick, you mentioned a lot about communication and your communication skills and struggles. And so Pierre's asking, what strategies did you use to speak clear, more concisely during the interview process? So can you talk us through that?
Yeah, for sure. I think I mentioned earlier, just practice talking to myself, placing myself in positions, at work, leading our director meetings, leading our team huddles, things like that. Just like putting myself intentionally in a place where I can practice talking more clearly and concisely. And I was actually going to mention that before Alex mentioned it, like, especially in the interview process, you want to make sure that anything that you bring up, you have good context and a good story behind, because they will dig and they will dig and they will dig if they feel like you're not being truthful and honest. So yeah.
I think so. So, if you want more on that, that's where coaching comes into play. But there are some strategies that I use to help answer questions. And in a basic layman's terms, what I can tell you is, in any question that's asked, you want to know where you were, where did you want to go, and how'd you get there? And really, you want to be able to tell a story about that.
Yeah.
And so that's in what I can tell you in a 10-second of how to do that is there are some tools though that you can use to help answer questions. And so if you want more information on that, definitely stay around at the end of this call, and Alex can give you the spiel about the coaching side of things.
All right, 2 more questions, Roderick. So you mentioned, you took a break because you had to reschedule an interview because you were doing a FTS assignment in Canada. So Joseph is asking, how many FTS assignments have you completed, and how have they helped you prepare maybe for the interview process, or just to know kind of what you're getting into?
Yeah, for sure. So I've done 7 assignments, 6 grand openings, and then 1 core restaurant opening or core restaurant assignment. As far as, helping me prepare for the interview process, I just made sure, I was able to tell a story from 1 or 2 assignments. And actually in my last interview with Emmy Dell, she asked me about my time on, as an FTS trainer. And I was able to kind of pull a story about at a core assignment. I spent 5 weeks in Florida with Jamie Finkheiser and Morgan Newman. So just being able to kind of tell my time, how about my time was there, and, you know, maybe a result or two I was able to generate, and maybe some impact I was able to leave with that story in Florida as well. So definitely you want to have a story or something, you know, to speak on as far as being an FTS trainer, for sure.
Awesome. And last question is, how many different stories should you prepare to tell, and how long should they be? I know you mentioned that they asked you about 3 times to kind of tell you a little bit about yourself. So did you kind of give the same story? Did you give different versions of your story? How did you kind of make sure that they were all connected with the different interviewers?
For sure. I think every interview I gave the same 5-minute kind of shorter, shorter story. And I guess for sure, you know, if they want to know more or pull more, you know, they'll definitely ask more. And that's what they did for sure in my last interview. Because of course, as Giovanna mentioned, I don't have a college degree. So in that last interview, I mentioned in my story, I mentioned that I came back home from school, you know, to help my family out. So they really kind of like digged into that in that story. So 5 minutes I gave the short 5-minute story for all of my interviews, and they kind of just created some conversation around my story and who I was and things like that. So, but I would for sure have, you know, a long version and then a short version to tell, because you never know. Hey, they might ask you, hey, give me, you know, from when you were born, you know, when you can remember to, you know, where you are now. So just having those things in your arsenal to ready to speak on for sure.
I would say too, Joseph, I know we're working through your story right now, but your 8-minute, the one that you just did that was 8 minutes, was close to the short version that you need. So I think we're working through that to get the story that you want. All right. Anybody else have any more questions? Throw them out there. We got 2 minutes left if anybody else has any more questions. Or if somebody wants to unmute themselves and ask questions, that's totally fine as well. Anybody else? Give you a second. All right. Well, I'm throwing it back to you, Alex.
Awesome, man. First of all, wonderful conversation between you two, Giovanna and Roderick. Definitely appreciate the time that you guys have put into putting this session together. Definitely was enlightened by a lot of the things that you guys put out there. And a lot of things that you guys had talked about. Really, I'm sure for those of you who are on the line that want to go into LDP, there's a lot of gems and nuggets all throughout this conversation that you guys can pick up on. So as we start to close out this Lead Better, I want to invite you guys to head over to www.tpenow.com. We've got the rest of the year's Lead Betters already scheduled out. For next month, we're going to have Brad come on from Pattern Talent. His name is Brad McDonald, a really good coach and consultant. He's going to come in and talk to us about some other leadership things. Also, do not forget to download the TPE app. So you can go into your app store right now and get the TPE app. And now a lot of you guys have heard.
It's great to be sitting here with my boy Alex. We're talking all things hospitality, all things leadership. It's amazing to see what he's doing with the pivot experience and everything he's doing, the leadership boy. I'm Sean DeVries, so I'm from Australia. You'll see me from Melbourne, obviously, here with Principal of Hospitality and Open Pantry Consulting.